A bit late.
It was a life-shattering experience. No, that was okay.
I have the great pleasure and honor to introduce these four distinguished guests. But first of all, welcome so much to this seminar on Red Sea security. What we will do now is that I will introduce the four speakers, and then they will each have 12 minutes to present, and then we will have the Q&A at the end. So the first speaker is Luigi Narbonne, and it's a pleasure to have you here again. He's been here several times. He's the director of the Mediterranean Platform, which is a non-profit organization that is doing both research and dialogue and education based in Rome. He used to be a professor of practice at Luis Guido Carli University in Rome as well. And before that, you were also in the European University Institute in Florence. You have been the EU ambassador to Saudi Arabia, based in Riyadh between 2008 and 2012. And you were also a non-resident EU ambassador to Qatar, Oman, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait. And you are the author of several e-books, including this recent one, which is that you will have the opportunity to present now, which is called The Red Sea, Divided by Water, United by Opportunities. And you've also published a large number of other e-books that have been very widely read, including Russia's soft power strategies in the MENA region and Africa from 2024, and Stepping Away from the Abyss, a gradual approach towards a new security system in the Persian Gulf. I will introduce all the speakers now. Our next speaker is Stig Jarle Hansen, who's sitting here, and you will get the chance to meet him after. He's a professor at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences. He used to be a Belfer Fellow at the John F. Kennedy School of Governance at Harvard University and a visiting fellow at Stanford University. You're the author of several widely acclaimed books, including Al-Shabaab in Somalia and The Horn, Sahel, and Rift, Fault Lines of the African Jihad. You are frequently consulted as an expert commentator by global media, including CNN, Al Jazeera, BBC, etc. And you have presented for government institutions, been an expert witness in courts in the United States, in UK, Canada, Norway, Germany. And you were involved in the research components following Norway's action plan against radicalization and violent extremism in 2014. Thirdly, we have Fatiha Daziani. She's a Gulf and Middle East research, and she's sitting in front here. And we are so happy that to have you here, really. I think it's the first time at NUPI, so it's really lovely to have you here. You're at the IRSEM, which is the research center of the French Military School, the Institute for Strategic Research at the Military School, where you work on the Arabian Peninsula, the Gulf, and Middle East affairs, and you've been there since 2014. You also teach history and socio-political developments at Sciences Po in Lille, focusing on the Arabian Peninsula. You've been a researcher before in CERI, in Sciences Po in Paris, and in CERMOC
years ago, yeah.
Yes, a long time ago. And you are the author of Saudi Arabia in 100 Questions, published in French, and a very high number, actually, of articles on GCC foreign policy and security that are very recent. So you should look on Google Scholar for her, because it's really interesting, and it's in both English and French. And last but not least, Virginie Colombier, who's sitting here. She's also been several times to NUPI before. And you are the scientific coordinator of the Mediterranean Platform, working with Luigi. You've been working on Libya for more than 10 years, working on dialogue efforts as well as research. You also used to be in Louis University, where you still teach. You were co-founder and scientific coordinator of the Middle East Directions Program at the EUI, European University Institute in Florence. And you are the author of several also widely read books, including Tribes and Global Jihadism, that you edited with Olivier Roy, and Inside Wars, Local Dynamics of Conflict in Syria and Libya. So now, without further ado,
I mean, a few figures are clearly, they're quite well discussed now in the media, but it's important to talk about them. About 12-14% of global trade transit through this waterway. It's about 1/3 of world container traffic, 40% of of trade between Europe and Asia transit from the Red Sea. 8% of LNG and 10% of global oil. So those figures are sizable, and this is a waterway that connects Asia and Europe, but not only. Increasingly, Africa is drawn into the picture as trade, in terms of trade with Asia, but also more and more there is a perspective of Red Sea being a connector between the Indo-Pacific and the Atlantic through the Mediterranean. Whether this will come about it remains to be seen, but obviously this is amongst the projects. The second very important point that needs to be stressed is that in spite of the readjustments in globalization and in global supply chains, trade continues to grow between Europe and Asia. Just a figure to give an example, EU import from Asia have grown from 600 billion in 2014 to 1.1 trillion in 2024. And export moved between 500 billion to 700 billion. So we had COVID, we had several crises, and trade continues to grow. And this perspective is that will continue to increase. I mean, we have recently the EU has signed a free trade agreement with India. So the perspective is that in spite of regionalization, breaking out of globalization as the way we have used to see, this trade flows will continue to be important. The third determinant is the fact that the Red Sea is marked by two choke points, the Bab el-Mandeb and the Red Sea. Those are, as you see, this is about 2,200 long stretch of waters, but there is a choke point at the entrance and a choke point at the other side of with the Suez Canal. In the Bab el-Mandeb is about 33 kilometers. It's more or less the same width of the Hormuz Strait. And we've seen these days what it means to block completely a choke point like the Strait of Hormuz. And it's important also to consider that there are 7 choke points in the world, and whatever happens in one has immediate repercussions in the other 6. So this is a key strategic issue that is going to remain. And we've seen in the past 2 years when the Houthis have started to strike vessels across the Red Sea, the consequence, the impact on trade, at least half of the shipping that was transiting through the Red Sea has been rerouted through Africa and the Cape of Good Hope, that with adding 12 to 14 days of navigations, increasing cost, increasing time of shipping, and obviously with a lot of disruption in navigation. So this is important but it's an issue that has to do with geography, and it's an issue that has to do with the security of the area, which we'll talk more about. This area is strategic also because there is ongoing scramble for corridors. You certainly know about the Belt and Road, the Chinese, that started in 2013. And it's Chinese Belt and Road is very much present in this area with logistics, with ports, with investment. This is clearly a key component. It's one of the end of the Belt and Road. So that is key, but there is competition. We know about the EMEC, the India, Middle East, Europe corridor. There are competing corridors with the idea of multiplying ways for trade to get from Asia to Europe, and including increasing the opportunity to use land as a connector as well. So this is ongoing, and it's for the time being, it's a competitive scramble. So it could become complementary if we were to see a more peaceful environment, so increasing avenues for trade. But at the moment, it risks to be exclusionary and competitive. So that is another area in which there is a strong focus. And that, obviously, all that has to do with great power rivalry. The US, which is used to be the security provider, the main hegemonic power in this area, is pivoting to Asia, is more and more less and less reliable. We know what is happening with Trump transactionalism. There is clearly uncertainty about the US presence, but China presence is instead increasingly steadily through the Belt and Road, but also through military presence. The first base of China overseas has been built in Djibouti, just on the Red Sea. That it's very telling about the China projection, and China need to protect the sea lane of communications. And this is, for the time being, China is so more or less peaceful presence, but that not necessarily going to stay. Russia is very eager to acquire a base in Port Sudan. There has been agreement. So there is great power rivalry, and Europe is present but not determinant. We don't, Europeans have bases in Djibouti, for instance, Italy, France, UK has a base in Diego Garcia, not far away. However, there is presence in the Gulf of the Europeans, but of course we, as Europeans, we have difficulties in withstanding the great power competition the way it's moving forward. So those are the main determinants of why this is a geostrategic arena. So it's, I would say, in vertical terms, this is clearly an important element. But that it's not the only question. I mean, there is obviously a lot going on at the regional level. If you look at the map here, we are talking about 9 coastal countries, going from Yemen all the way through Somalia on the opposite side. There is clearly big discrepancies between these countries. Some very rich Gulf countries and very poor countries and failed countries like Somalia. So that is a very strong asymmetry. But the fact that this has become a strategic global arena has brought regional countries to increase both presence, geoeconomic presence, military presence, increase geopolitical projection and trade. So certainly, for instance, you certainly know that Saudi Arabia has been, the Saudi 2030 vision has been trying to shift the emphasis of country development and industrial base away from the Persian Gulf, which is, as we've seen these days, an area of insecurity, to the west, to the Red Sea. Saudis, for instance, this has been very handy because in these days they've been able to redirect the shipment of oil from the Persian Gulf to the Red Sea in the Yanbu port. About 4 million barrels per day are now shipped to that, and that allows of course, some oil to flow in spite of the closure of the Hormuz Strait. But the Saudis are trying to develop the whole thing. You certainly have heard about NEOM, this line city in the north of the Red Sea. But there is port development, there is tourism development. This is the area where the Saudis see their future. Other countries, although, for instance, UAE, we'll hear more about it. It's not a Red Sea country, but it's has a projection on the Red Sea. Dubai port has been building ports across from Yemen to Horn of Africa, with the idea that Africa will become a key important player in economic terms in the future, and the port position, the port developments from the UAE positions the country as a trading post for connecting Africa to Asia. So that is moving. In addition, there is a very strong increase in trade and investment in the one direction, of mostly from the Gulf to East Africa, and they are looking for investment in agriculture for their own food security, to have agricultural produce which they supplement their water scarcity. They have been acquiring land, and this has been somehow controversial because, of course, creates problems with the local communities in East Africa, but also looking for rare minerals, for investment in infrastructure. So there is a huge investment, a geoeconomic investment flow and trade flow from Gulf to the east, but it's not only that. I mean, obviously there is countries in East Africa and the Horn of Africa are looking for capital and are dependent on hydrocarbons from the Gulf, but there is also migration flows that move the other way. A lot of migrants from this part of Africa move they move towards the Gulf, and so there are remittances coming back from the Gulf, and this is another area of close integration between the two. So there is complementarity between the two areas, but there is also a strong asymmetry. There is obviously the leverage, the financial power. It's in the hands of the Gulf, and countries in the East Africa have difficulties in coping with that. That brings about the geopolitical dimension. These countries have been projecting power in East Africa, the Gulf countries. They've been projecting their own rivalries. They have been becoming somehow a destabilizing factor because they have been taking sides in various local conflicts. We have three wars ongoing in Sudan, in Yemen, and in Somalia. And countries, the Gulf countries, are somehow mingling into this. We know about the Sudan, of course, with Saudi Arabia supporting SAF and UAE supporting RSF. But this situation applies to Yemen. We've seen recently in Yemen the Saudis and Emiratis clashing over the support to local parties. And the fact that they have this projection makes very difficult to move towards conflict resolution. And that is clearly a destabilizing factor. Zero-sum approaches, competitive approaches, rivalries, all that is destabilizing the region. We also seen the emergence in these three flashpoints of very powerful non-state actors: the Houthis, Al-Shabaab, the Houthis in Yemen, Al-Shabaab in Somalia. There is clearly a connection between those. They are trafficking the weapons, they are trafficking drugs, and this creates power for them. So, in view of and all of this spills over into maritime insecurity. This comes in terms started with piracy in Somalia over 10 years ago, and then is moved into attacks to the shipping lanes. And the reports give this on the rise. They have been acquiring military capabilities, capacity to strike even farther away on the sea, these terrorist groups and non-state groups. So the risk that this maritime destabilization will continue and will increase. And it doesn't take much. We've seen it. It's a question of just firing one missile or one drone every now and then. It's enough to block the traffic because it's the fear, and it's the rising cost of insurance, is the ripple effect of instability. You don't need a navy to stop traffic along this. And the risk that it becomes widespread, not only the Red Sea, but it could spill over into also southern part of Africa, beyond Somalia, etc. So that is an issue. So what the ebook looks at after this somehow concerning analysis, it looks at potential for de-escalation. There is clearly a lot of, I take one more minute because it's important, perhaps then we will continue in later on, but there is a possibility to look at the shared concerns. For instance, navigation, freedom of navigation and safety of navigation is an issue for everybody. It has impact on us, on Europe, but it has an impact on the Gulf, obviously. The vision doesn't make any sense if you have total insecurity there, but also for East Africa. I mean, the ports of East Africa, in the Horn of Africa, 10 ports have been seriously impacted by what has happened over the past 3 years, 2.5 years. And that has an impact on economic development, has an impact on governance in these countries. So there is space for convergence, they're looking at opportunities to start a positive step towards cooperation. Perhaps if there are questions on that, I will dwell more on this part. Thank you very much.
Now, Stig Erle Hansen. Thank you so much. No, I just...
I have my own slides here. I was asked here today to present the implications of Yemen and the Houthis on Red Sea security in relation to the Iran war. And I would say in relations to a quite complex conflict cleavage that is splitting the Middle East, but also the Horn of Africa. So I think today the Middle East is more important for the Horn of Africa than at least for 50 years. What we see is Israel is back as an actor, both in Yemen and in the Horn, and the two are very much interrelated. That I will explain. But there is also a lot of misunderstandings about the dynamics of this big geopolitical game that is going on, that is interconnected, but sometimes the interconnections is more complex than people believe it to be. So I will start to clear up something about the Houthis. There's important things to know about the strategical context of the Houthis. I will get back to some of it. And one of the most important things is to understand that for the first 6 years of their existence, the experts studying this group didn't see any traces of large-scale weapon transfers from Iran. There's reasons for that, and I will get back to that. The second thing is perhaps the more obvious, that the previous speaker was kind of introducing to us. Because of the world, because of the straits, the importance of the straits in the world, and Bab el-Mandeb, Houthis is really a ragtag group that ended up having global importance. It's a kind of structured family group that has connections in Sada's tribal society in the north. That because of the narrowness of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait has quite a reach. And I was very happy that the previous speaker raised the issues of the underwriters and the insurers, because they play a big role in that reach. Houthis, they don't need to hit to have their effect. They just need to fire, and they can miss the ships, and very often they do miss the ships. But on the other hand, they shouldn't be underestimated. One of the reasons that I'm saying this is the rumors around what happened to Harry Truman after the last round between the Houthis and the United States. So the Houthis, for the first time since World War II, since Imperial Japan managed to launch attacks on an American carrier group and an American aircraft carrier. And what happened there is hard to say. We don't know. What the Americans say is officially is that they lost 2 airplanes because of accidents. But my friends in the American Navy, they would say that this was the hardest round of action they ever encountered as long as they served in the Navy. So there might have been quite an exchange there, and there were at least tense moments in that exchange. And if you have low accuracy on your missiles, mind you, they are scaling up a little bit. So there's other systems coming in. You have to compensate for that. And what you see is, if the Houthis want to take out an attack, is basically swarm attacks. And the Houthis have developed this over time. The first time I saw extensive use of cruise missiles in this area of the world, including the Horn, was from the Houthis when they started to have rounds against Saudi Arabia after basically outbreak of the war, which creepingly started in 2014, the current Yemeni civil war, so to say. This thing about having low technological level also gives some important advantages to the Houthis that maybe is lacking for the Iranians. It gives resilience because they're not dependent on the technological infrastructure that Iran is to a larger extent dependent on. And the fact that they have been fighting a civil war since 2015, you can argue since 2014, you know, that you had a creeping coup there. For the large part of that civil war, they've been fighting under enemy air superiority. That also enables them to have some kind of clout. But I think we have to return to the origins, because I have a kind of important point to make about the Houthis, and that is you start examining the local context, because if you start to examine the local context, you will see that the Houthis have often been said to be a crucial part of the so-called axis of resistance, but they have their own interests. I've been involved in several interactions on behalf of various parties with the Houthis. And what I've seen all the time there is if you want to try to go through Iranian authorities to reach the Houthis, you will get resistance from the Houthis. So and as I said, you can go into the old International Crisis Group reports about the first 6 rounds, I will get back to that, what that is, of Houthi government fighting. And the experts at the time will mostly say that the Iranian hand is either very little or it's non-existent. So that's very important, I think. And it's very important today because they're not acting in the current war. Very important. And it's very important to understand. And I will get back to why they are not acting today. But let's go through Houthi history. So the Houthis, the conspiracy theories of the Houthis say that they are connected to the fall of the Imamate in the 60s, where you had this big showdown between Nasser and the classical monarchies in the Middle East. Or in the Yemeni civil war at the time, they had a lot of them. And basically the Imamate was historically connected to the Shias in Yemen, and they, in the end, had to step down. I won't say that they lost, but they had to step down. So conspiracies about the Houthis in the early 2000s would say, yeah, they want to erase the Imam, they want to resurrect the Imamate, they want to have the Imamate back. And I'm not very convinced about it, but it's a good thing to know that it's there. You also have the Houthis and the leaders of the Houthi movement today being members of the Al-Haq Shia party. But when you go to the Houthis, it's really a family movement. There's a formal structure on the movement. They have their own government, the Yemeni government. They have their own commanders. But if you want to go to the core and the most important members, you don't go to the formal ministers. You go to the family members of the Houthi family. The founding father of the Houthi movement is basically was killed in 2004 after demonstrations. And the theme of the demonstrations are also very important. What kind of topics were raised in the demonstrations? Anti-Israel, pro-Palestine, anti-Saudi Arabian. Why? Because in the north there was a lot of resistance amongst the Shias against Saudi Arabian missionary work at the time. So they are crucial cases of in the founding mythology of the Houthi movement. As we talked about, they had 6 rounds of fighting in the 2000s before the current civil war. So in 2009, they were very brave and they started to bomb Saudi Arabia. They had a short-term Saudi intervention. You had, in the later rounds, you had the Qataris trying to mediate with mixed success. And then you had the Arab Spring. I won't touch upon the Arab Spring that much, but you had the national reconciliation process where the Houthis had some strong views on the national structure of Yemen, basically being centralists. But not good to form alliances with others, but very good to slowly but steady build up their power in the north and taking out the Yemeni army, which was a kind of special construction with brigades having loyalties everywhere, not to the government. Step by step, invading then Sana'a in the end in a creeping coup in September 2014 without meeting a resistance from the parts of the army that were there because they were loyal to the president that was there before the Arab Spring. And since 2014, you have first a fast-moving civil war where the Houthis push out, trying to take Aden, and then they are pushed away after Emirati and Saudi Arabian interventions. Saudi Arabians going in the air, and the Emiratis hiring soldiers and mercenaries from across the world, including Sudan, Somalia, and Latin America, South America, to fight against the Houthis and successfully driving them back. But then the whole state of affairs end up in strange stalemate conflict with strange fractions on both sides. And since 2022, you had this, basically a ceasefire. The ceasefire ended, but it's kind of functioning even after it ended. So it's a kind of strange Vare state where the fighting very often is inside the alliance, especially inside the then Saudi Arabian and Emirati-backed alliance. From day one, you saw there were tensions in that alliance. So the Emiratis, maybe, the other speakers will get back to this, but the Emiratis crucially hit down and struck down on wherever it saw Islamists. And one of the actors they struck down on heavily was a crucial actor in the alliance against the Houthis, Islah, which itself will not say that it's the Yemeni Muslim Brotherhood, but I would rather say it, although it has a tribal component. Some people are more brothers than other people. Remember Orwell on this issue. So what you have then is the state of Wara that is there until quite recently. But in order to understand the Houthis today, you have to understand they built up their own power themselves. It's the first thing. They were anti-Saudi Arabian from the start. They were anti-Israeli and very concerned about the Israeli-Palestine situation. And in the founding moment of the Houthis, maybe Iran was not that important. And there might be another reasons that you have to remember. Iran is a 12er Shiite country, and the Houthis are 5ers, rather a part of Shiism who's closer to Sunnis. So these things you should remember. So what happens now? Yeah, other people will talk about the United Arab Emirates collapse. They received a lot of beating in Yemen, but I will also get back to the beating they received in Somalia. So there have been a lot of setbacks from the Emiratis that I'm sure others will present better than I can. But let's rather continue with the Houthis, because the big riddle that I want to try to present to you now today, which also tells us something about the Houthis, is that the Houthis today are hands-off. You have one of the parties in the so-called Axis resistance who haven't fired a single missile in support of Iran. And this is notable. So what if you follow the Houthis on the Twitter? They would say, we're waiting for the right moment. They're waiting for the right moment. But, well, I wonder. They waited quite a long time now. And the Houthis had some close in hitting Israel last time they attacked Israel during the Palestinian Gaza crisis. You know, they were not very accurate. They managed to hit football fields outside of Eilat. But they were there, and the missiles were coming in from another direction. But how do you explain then what is happening? Why are the Houthis reluctant? Well, the first thing is basically that maybe they are not as close to Iran as many expected them to be. There's some indications there. The second thing is that they've seen the ability of the Israelis to take out Houthi leadership. Remember, it's a family business. Really? A little bit unfair towards the Houthis here, but in reality, if you meet ever a Houthi minister of Yemen, don't expect that minister to hold the power he says he has. So they managed to take the foreign minister, they managed to take the prime minister, the Israelis, on August 28, 2025, quite recently. It shocked the Houthis quite well, a lot. But I tell you one thing. Jamal Ahmed, who was the foreign minister, I worked a little bit with the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Yemen, and he was not the person holding power. He was not the man controlling that ministry. That was Hussein al-Essi, who's still alive. So I asked tomorrow my partners in Aden where he was, and they said he's probably hiding out in a hole somewhere. I don't know how we should react to that comment, but that's another issue. And what the Houthis have showed them to be is very tied up to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, very much tied up to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There might be clauses in the agreement that ended the last war between the Houthis and the United States as well that we don't know about. Also in this war, it seems like the Israelis were the highest concern for the Houthis. Openly, United States admitted that they allowed the Houthis to still attack Israel as long as they don't attack the United States. So this was seen as a victory, but there might have been other clauses there. There might be, since they're improving their weapon systems being resupplied quite recently by Iran, it might be that there also is some logistical consequences because of the hardship Iran is facing. And of course, it might be that the Houthis are sitting down and watching to which way the wind will blow also. You know, will Iran come out of top? Will it tumble quite early? Then it's no use to go into the war. But as I tell you, they say that the American attack is horrible against Iran, and they say we're waiting for the right moment. We're waiting for the right moment, but they waited quite a long time now. So I'm just giving you the alternatives here because I cannot fully say for sure which of these alternatives it is. I do think that the August attack is a sign of Israeli strength and weakness. So there might be some communication here because either Israel has a weak intelligence presence and lack of understanding of the Houthis, or it was just signaling that they take out the formal ministers instead of taking the real power holders. So there's a lot of signal games going on here. And I would say that the Israeli ability to deter has become much stronger. Because I talked about this a little bit at the start. Israel has re-entered the Horn of Africa as a player in the Horn of Africa. And I would say it has done so with quite strength and little effort for the time being. So what Israel did on the other side of the Gulf of Aden, quite close to the Houthis areas, is to be the first country in the world who recognized the enclave of Somaliland. Somaliland is impressive in many ways. It had free elections as declared by international observers since 2002. All the elections have been declared free and fair, and their audience, seldom in this region, the opposition can actually win, and they do win a lot. And that's kind of something that is rather special. But because of the focus on Somali sovereignty, not a single country recognized the state. South Africa was very close, but the first country that recognized it was Israel. And Somaliland is something that is quite obvious to the international actors, is very strategic. Indeed, the Russians, the Soviet Union, used to have a full Tu-22 base in order to attack American carriers in the Indian Oceans during the Cold War. And that base airport is still there in Berbera, and there's a lot of speculations. And it is a tool for Netanyahu. It is a Damocles sword for Netanyahu to keep at the Houthis' throat. Basically saying, if things go wrong, we will develop our relationship with Somaliland, then we have the possibility to lash out at you quite frequently. We don't need to fly all the way from Israel. We can be in your close neighborhood. So this can go fast. We can hit you quite. And this might be connected. It might be a potential there that can be developed. And what you see, I think, is very important. You see an Israeli re-entry into the Horn. You see Israel becoming a loose friend of Somaliland. Somaliland has this big problem that Turkey got basically a negotiated deal to the Somalis about the Somali government in Mogadishu controlling airspace. That means that you need visas to Somaliland, which means a big problem for an independent state. If you see Somaliland as an independent state, that is. You have to go to basically the Somali capital before you actually end up going into Hargeisa. And they're using Israel actively, and this was maybe the only tool Israel had to go into the Horn of Africa. The end of these developments are not seen yet. But what we see is that Somaliland signed up with the Abrahamic Accord. And what we see in Somaliland is an alignment between Israel and United Arab Emirates that has been weakened in the area. And we also see Israel having more interest again in Ethiopia. So Israel is coming in very slowly. And there's a new Cold War. Maybe older people will talk more about it. And we can see the contours here in the Horn as well. There's two strong powers that are sitting left in the Middle East. One is Turkey, one is Israel, and we can see that the Turks and the Israelis are building up slightly against each other at the Horn. We don't see that in Yemen, but we see it in the Horn. And now I have 0 minutes left, so I have to step down. But I hope it was very interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was very interesting. Now, Fatih Hadaj, yes, you have 12 minutes, please.
I will try.
Yes. Because it would be great to have some time for questions at the end.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And thank you very much, Steve, even if you were very long. But it was stunning and very, it will facilitate my presentation. So, I will talk about the UAE's foreign policy in the Red Sea, especially around Yemen, the Horn of Africa, and more broadly about what could be described as these imperial ambitions in Africa. First, I will start with the context of the ongoing situation we are witnessing today with this third Gulf War. Some of my colleagues qualify this war as the fourth one, but I say the third Gulf War because the impacts of this war are larger than the second Gulf War that aimed to liberate Kuwait. And the first was the long 8 years war between Iraq and Iran. The so-called other Gulf War was the US invasion of Iraq. So that's why I say the third Gulf War. So the 6 Gulf monarchies are currently being targeted, especially American military bases and economic interests of these countries. So Iran's retaliation has been particularly focused in targeting UAE. So why UAE is the main target? It's by far the main target of Iran's retaliation for several reasons. But in my view, the most important reason is related to the strategic choice made by Abu Dhabi and its leader, Mohammed bin Zayed, also known as MBZ, to align very closely with Israel's security and military powerhouse. So obviously, in order to fulfill the lack of US security guarantee vis-à-vis the Iranian threat, while also choosing détente with Iran, UAE made a clear choice to align with Israel's security approach in the region. So the first attacks led by Israel and followed by US on last 28 February was targeting the head of the regimes and especially the guide, the supreme guide, Ali Khamenei. So of course, Iran, it was a very red line, and UAE is a very close neighbor and was targeted primarily because of this very close rapprochement with Israel that has been increased during the war in Gaza. UAE has been, and when I say UAE, I will focus on Abu Dhabi, the political capital, and MBZ, since 2014, decided to dramatically change the UAE foreign policy in militarizing the foreign policy, for instance, in Yemen, in Africa, everywhere. And this was parallel to the Arab Spring. So clearly, since the beginning of the 2010 decade, this was the choice of Abu Dhabi, but until Sheikh Khalifa was the head of the Federation and Emirate of Abu Dhabi, MBZ couldn't, of course, manage as openly as he has done. So for me, this third Gulf War will have very important political impacts inside the Federation. And this I will elaborate in the discussion because I have to, of course, speak mainly about UAE foreign policy in the Red Sea and Africa. So I could elaborate about this because this rapprochement with Israel is the very personal choice of MBZ and perhaps his brother Tahnoun. But the others were very skeptical. And there is a very, very high tension inside UAE and inside Abu Dhabi. Of course, I have some of my contacts that from business tycoons and from very high-ranking retired militaries that the tension is very high. So after the attacks of October 7, 2023, as I said, UAE further strengthened its security and cooperation with Israel, including, of course, the cooperation on cyber, intelligence, military, etc. And this after signing the Abraham Accord in September 15, 2020. So this put Israel at the forefront in the region because Israel became a partner within the US CENTCOM. So physically present in the Arabian Peninsula. And that's why Iran, even if Iran shares a lot of interest in UAE and in particular in Dubai, they have a huge amount of money in Dubai banks, the Pasdaran, and even some religious figures, etc. But I don't think that this impact a lot on the retaliations of Iran in UAE. Because we are, according to me, we are really attending a turning point in the architecture of the security in the whole region. And UAE, with its very particular policy, is totally isolated in the region. They have, and this is particularly highlighted during the last, confrontation between UAE and Saudi Arabia in South Yemen, as you told, Stig. So. So, in my view, this third Gulf War is a turning point for UAE's position and UAE foreign policy. Today, they are obviously a source of vulnerability. Iran has been saying for decades that the Gulf states will be the main target because of their several US military bases. And the UAE is also a key target because attacking UAE affects the global economy because UAE is the most globalized economy in the region, much more than Saudi Arabia. And the economic interests of UAE are exposed at the forefront in this show of the Persian Gulf. Whereas, as Luigi said, Saudi Arabia under MBS leadership shifted the interest on the Red Sea coast, even if Riyadh is also the main economic capital. But we can see with this third Gulf War that the greater states, the main states, Saudi Arabia and Sultanate of Oman, will remain very important in the new security architecture because they are much more resilient, and the very vulnerable states will be all these emirates on the Persian Gulf coast. And UAE, for me, is the most vulnerable because of its political and security choices and because of its economy, global economy interest. UAE was positioning itself as the hub of the logistic, of the interconnectivity. Luigi spoke about this IMEC. For me, the IMEC is halas, finished, but we don't know how this war will, but I can't imagine that this connectivity corridor from India passing in UAE through all the territory of Saudi Arabia until Haifa in Israel and up to Europe is feasible with this context. Also, of course, Abraham Accord is a finished story, and because Abraham Accord excluded the very important question of a political solution for the Palestinian state. That's why Saudi Arabia was quite smart to avoid joining this Abraham Accord, even though Riyadh made a close rapprochement also with Israel economically and with the security relations also. But of course, the war in Gaza was a breakthrough vis-à-vis this rapprochement. And this brings me also to my main question: is the UAE's foreign policy in the Red Sea and Africa still sustainable? Before this third Gulf War, tensions were already visible. As Stig said, we attended the conflict in Yemen that showed a strategic breakthrough between Riyadh and Abu Dhabi. And of course, these differences, these conflicts of interest were not new. But Riyadh maintained really a low profile, even when I had interviews, even recently, last October I was there, and they keep saying, really, we don't have major conflicting issues with UAE, except for us, the red line is if they touch Hadramaut. And STC, the southern separatists in Yemen, they made this offensive since last December, beginning of last December, to Hadramaut, which has 800 kilometers bordering Saudi Arabia, and also in Mahra. Mahra, it's another governorate bordering the Sultanate of Oman on 300 kilometers. Just 2 minutes. Well, yes, okay. So this led to this direct confrontation, and Riyadh took an offensive, and they were able to remove Abu Dhabi from its positions along the Yemeni coast, and this took only 10 days to remove 10 years of efforts of Abu Dhabi in implementing itself in South Yemen, in Socotra, Perim, and also this had impacts in Somalia also. So, beyond Yemen, Saudi Arabia now works also to counter UAE's regional approach along the southern Yemen coast, but also from Somalia to Sudan, coordinating with partners. Egypt officially aligns with Saudi Arabia's stances, while Turkey and several GCC states, most of them, including Qatar and Sultanate of Oman, support Saudi efforts to prevent fragmentation in the south of the peninsula. So finally, I want to mention the UAE's weight in Africa today. No, okay, so I don't have time. So yeah, so
We can do it in the Q&A.
yes, okay. So, but let me just conclude, please. So from 2014 onwards, under MBZ, the UAE adopted a more proactive and interventionist foreign policy. The country became a major player in Africa. It's the fourth powerhouse in Africa now, UAE. Not only in the Horn of Africa, but also in Central Africa, across the Gulf of Guinea, in Senegal, Morocco, and now they are strengthening their presence in the Sahelian countries. So, in short, the UAE growing influence in African emerging markets is impressive, but it conflicts with its stated principles. For example, promoting a stable political, economic, and social environment contradicts by opaque transactions linked to gold smuggling from conflicting zones in Central Africa and Sudan. And this, most of this gold, about 95%, ends up to Dubai. So the Arab Spring also politicized the UAE presence in Africa, especially Libya, Egypt, where the UAE has a long-established presence. And so we will speak about the militarization of the foreign policy, if you want, in the discussion. But to conclude, ultimately, the UAE will likely continue to defend its interest in Africa aggressively because its domestic economic model is under direct threat from ongoing regional conflict, in which the Federation has been the main Gulf state affected. Africa is therefore both an economic and strategic lifeline for Abu Dhabi, linking its security and political ambitions. But I'm highly skeptical on the ability of Abu Dhabi to pursue and to impose its aggressive agenda while the Federation will be sharply politically impacted. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginie. I see we're running
I know,
quite
I
low
will
on
try
time,
to
so if you can
try to keep it very brief. Thanks,
That would be
Fatiha
lovely.
and colleagues for the introduction. I think Fatiha introduced very well what I wanted to discuss. Essentially look at the impact of the current dynamics in the Red Sea onto Libya, and therefore what does that mean for the broader region. I think, as we said, when we look at the Red Sea, clearly we're not talking only about maritime disruption. And if you look at the map, of the broad map of North Africa, Red Sea, Middle East, you see that the various conflicts are not isolated. On the contrary, they're increasingly forming a kind of continuum of insecurity from the Gulf to the Sahel. And then in that environment, the Red Sea arena, so the Gulf and also the Horn, is now increasingly a kind of single security ecosystem. And it links together Gulf powers, the Sudan war, the Horn of Africa, and also increasingly North Africa. And this instability travels essentially through three things: external sponsorship, well illustrated by Fatiha now, armed networks, but also corridors. And the corridors that Luigi mentioned are not the only corridors that are important to look at in this moment. What we see there is that the Red Sea dynamics are just like generating kind of shock waves through these transnational corridors. And in Libya, they're having a very strong impact, and they're reshaping not only the security, but also the political economy of the conflict. I would say first that the Red Sea, as we said, is not projecting instability only on sea, but also inland, and this is a very important point. Central to these dynamics has been what's happening in the Gulf, and in particular, the divergences increasingly visible between the UAE and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, with clearly an open rivalry between two divergent models. The Saudi model, which is more state-centric, and the Emirati model, which is more kind of networked influence through local actors. And in the past years, the UAE, and maybe more specifically Abu Dhabi, has really developed this strategy of networked power projection. And this has enabled them to become more influential. The approach is economic, through infrastructure, investments in ports, logistics, etc. Support to non-state actors. We see this very clearly in Sudan, for instance, with the support to the RSF. But also this very idea that all the influence is deployed through an indirect, deniable and network-based approach. So the core logic is that power for the Emirates comes not only or not essentially through control on territories, but more on these networks and these corridors. And this shows very well in how it has shaped the Sudan war dynamics, but also some specific corridors in Libya, and how it's now increasingly spilling over into the Sahel. Sudan, in this system, has become a very, very important pivot. Since 2023, the war and the fragmentation of authority has really led to the RSF and Burhan forces to becoming like direct opponents. And the RSF survival has depended essentially on cross-border supply routes. And in that context, we've seen in the past couple of years how the southeastern part of Libya, and in particular the area, the kind of triangle linking Sudan, Libya, and Chad, is becoming absolutely central for the survival and the resilience of the RSF. And in particular, the city of Kufra and the military installations there are becoming central. So what's the idea now is that who controls this corridor? Corridor of supply and logistics is capable of controlling all the key networks that are central to the conflict. They control weapon supply, fuel supply, fighter supply, but also migrants. And these networks, link all the conflicts across the border. And this is very important because here again, the key is not control over territory, it's control over those flows as key, I would say, material, key elements. Sudan is at the center of this system, and we see increasingly risks of spillover. It is clearly obvious in Chad, where you have now dynamics of recruitment, of weapons circulation, of conflict diffusion, which are becoming increasingly obvious. But it's also increasingly obvious in Libya, where the very geography of the conflict is also changing. And Libya, with regard to the Red Sea, has moved from being kind of a periphery to a more central hub in the Red Sea arena. First, because it's a central node in these corridor systems through the logistics hub. Abu Dhabi has very much relied on its alliance with the Houthis family to provide weapons and support not only to the Houthis in Libya, but also using the Houthis forces to supply the RSF in Sudan. It has provided access to airstrips, again, fuel provision, specific access to routes. This is also happening through the conflict economy node. So obviously, all these logistics hubs and the way flows are circulating is part of a war economy which is now increasingly integrated between the different countries. And here again, Sudan is central, but it's very much linking together Sudan, Libya, and Chad. And in that new geography, Libya has become a very important asset for Abu Dhabi. And in particular, not all of Libya, but the southern part of the territory, and in particular, those areas controlled by the Houthi family. So this is very important because in this new environment, Libya is not just affected by what's happening in the Red Sea, but it's becoming itself a new kind of platform for regional power projection. It's not only what we've seen happening during the conflict in 2019, 2020, where you had two rival camps competing for power over Tripoli in the capital, so very much a kind of coastal conflict for control over the central bank and the key centers of power and center of economy in Libya. It's now moving further to the south in a situation where you have a political process which is to a large extent deadlocked, but the focus of the parties to the conflict and therefore also the focus of international parties has largely moved to the south. And because of what's happening in the Gulf in this very moment, this is also starting to raise very serious questions for the future of the political environment in Libya. Why? Because the Haftar family has very much become dependent on the Emirates, and in particular in Abu Dhabi. And now we see that this is creating increasingly tense relationship with other key international actors in Libya, in particular Egypt and Turkey. And so we start seeing the potential of reshaping of the power dynamics in Libya, and with the Haftar family itself becoming at the center of this dynamics, with the potential for increasing rivalries between Haftar's son. As you know, much has been made in the past couple of years to prepare for the succession of Khalifa Haftar, and in particular, several of his sons have been positioning themselves, using to a large extent those external sponsors to get the grip onto the security sector, but also on the economy. So what's happening now in the Red Sea arena and in the Gulf is potentially threatening to disrupt this model. Last but not least of the points is the effect of all this on migration. I said that there is an increasingly high risk of spillover of the conflict in Sudan to the Sahel region. I think Fatiha also highlighted it very well, because you have basically a kind of overlap of all these routes that I mentioned, talking about weapons supply, fuel smuggling, fighters, mercenaries exchange, but also migration roads are increasingly embedded into the same corridor that I was mentioning. So they all go through the same corridors, and these various elements are being central now to sustaining conflicts. It's basically governed by the same actors, and they have the same kind of incentives. So it's all part of a broader war economy system, which brings together all these elements. In the conclusion, I can say that there are basically three key takeaways that we should have in mind. First, this idea of a continuum of insecurity. I think all of the presentations highlight the fact that you increasingly have a single interconnected system which links together the Red Sea, Sudan, Libya, and the Sahel. Second point, those networks are not so much focused on, are not based on the control over territories as such, but more over the control of flows. So on this idea of corridors, which is very important because it's also challenging the traditional models of governance. If what matters are a certain number of nodes in a network and the circulation of flows, of course, you don't care so much about how a state or full state territory is governed and controlled. This is very important. Last, the long-term consequences is that what we see happening, and despite the fact that maybe the sustainability of the Emirati strategy highlighted by Fatiha is doubtful, you see still that the impact of what has been transformed over the past years will have long-term and lasting consequences in terms of how war economies are becoming increasingly entrenched, and they have kind of a life of their own. Second, they have significantly empowered armed intermediaries, especially in specific regions. And this means that since they all go through the same corridors, it means also persistent migration pressure towards North Africa and also Europe. So I think all these dynamics taken together point to the fact that we really see a kind of structural shift into how the conflict operates across the region. And for what remains, what regards Libya, I think Libya itself and the way we look at the conflict is increasingly being transformed. And Libya is not so much now an isolated crisis, but increasingly part of a wider trans-regional system. So I stop here. I run out. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for all these fascinating interventions. Can I please ask you to take a seat at the podium? And meanwhile, please, if you have any questions, you're welcome to raise your hands. Maybe we can start with Audun. Please be as brief as possible and present yourself as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Extremely interesting presentations and really shows the interlinks between various parts of this larger region. I have two questions. There have been some reports that Saudi Arabia is running a very intensive diplomacy towards the Houthis in order to make the Houthis stay calm in this current conflict. What kind of incentives do you suppose that Saudi Arabia is giving the Houthis at the time being? And I would like to ask you as well, what you're describing is a kind of a economic statecraft model being pushed forward by the United Arab Emirates. So it sort of could be a bit similar to the Belt and Road initiative from China. When you look at DP World, for example, DP World seems to be like a tool of the Emirati government. At the same time, it's a global commercial actor. How would you sort of analyze this maybe this particular company, but also similar companies from the Emirates pushing Emirati strategic interests in various parts of the world?
If you don't mind, I think we will gather some questions in the interest of time, and I'm sorry about this. You forgot to present yourself.
Yeah, sorry, I'm really sorry. Audun Golstavik from DNB Bank. I work on geopolitical issues in DNB.
Yes, yes, Jon Harald.
Jon Harald Sandeli, I work here at NUPI. Thank you for very interesting presentations. I guess this question is either to the last speaker or to Stig Jarle, and it concerns the role of Ethiopia, and which is the kind of hegemon on the Horn of Africa, but is also a landlocked country. But also Ethiopia, with support from Russia, has to start to build up its navy again. And it has a memorandum of understanding with Somaliland, access to the Bedra port. It seeks the Assab port. I think there's perhaps a war looming also in the region. You know? So could you say something about that kind of dynamics? You know, so it's not only Ethiopia, but also Russia. You know, supporting Ethiopia as which used to be a long traditional ally of the U.S. Russia is also having access to bases now in Eritrea, and UAE is also supporting Ethiopia, so there's kind of...
Julia?
Yes, Julia Williamson, I'm a research professor here. Thank you so much for very interesting presentations. I think for those of us who don't work on the region, we're kind of trying to imagine what this huge crisis will result in also for Europe and us. So if you could give us just a couple of words from your point of view on both the effects of the current turmoil on social inequalities, to use that very broad framing, and of course also out-migration into Europe. Thank you.
Lastly.
Thank you. My name is Goitam Gabriel. I'm from the London School of Economics. My question is to all the panelists, really. The integration between the Middle East and the Horn of Africa through these conflict patterns is largely driven by, what I gather from your presentation, by economic statecraft and economic factors. So I'm curious about the extent to which the war in Iran and the Gulf broadly, and the economic repercussions that will have on the local economies there, might lead to a reversion of this integration, that they will not have any more money to project power into the Horn of Africa, and that we'll see a reversal of these processes. So, thank you.
I have one question, if I may, and I wanted to ask you, Luigi, specifically about what you ended on in your presentation about the avenues for deepening cooperation and détente of the Red Sea Cold War that you mentioned. What are the options and solutions that you foresee to increase cooperation? Could you expand on this, please? And also maybe on the future of to Fatiha on Gulf security architecture after the Iran war or the Third Gulf War, if there is time on that, would be, of course, interesting. Maybe you can take select questions and we can take around. We can start with Virginie and then we can go the other way. And unless, yeah, is that fine with you?
Very briefly, I think the migration question and the impact for Europe. The risk I see, there are two elements. First, this kind of increasing connectivity between theaters of conflict is clearly bad news, I think, in terms of the impact of this situation on the population, and also on the fact that if the logic of governance is like following these corridors and looking at what the key points that matter, it means also exclusion and marginalization of many other areas that become of like less value. So I think there's a real risk of an increased fragmentation and gap divergence between those areas that are seen as of high value and on which many actors, local and external, may converge and compete for the control of these places, while on the contrary, other areas will become increasingly of less importance and left on the side. And I think this is a problem because it's also what we've seen for those of us who look at the Sahel or other areas in Africa. You see that these issues of lack of governance and lack of state reach to certain region has been a very important element and reason for phenomenon. I mean, for the development of extremism, of violence, violent extremism, etc. So I would say this is a negative impact. The second thing is also the risk, and we've seen this through the policies of the EU that aim at externalizing and securitizing border control management. And we've seen very well, I mean, in a number of areas, you looking at Tunisia, at Libya, at Egypt, that by supporting some of these actors that are dominating the security field, you also kind of feed and support the very same actors that are playing central roles in migration networks. So you end up, I mean, supporting and giving resources for the very actors that make the flow continue and run, and you delegate kind of your security and your border control to these very actors that play a central role. So I think it really requires from the side of Europe of a deep rethinking of how policies are designed, both in terms of migration control, but also, I would say, conflict resolution.
Thanks much, Virginie.
Yes, I didn't understand very well the question about the UAE economy, but I think the main remark for me is to highlight the level of exposure of UAE economic choices with this third Gulf War. For example, Iran has already targeted data centers, which is the new symbols of the UAE new tech economy, in order to diversify post-fossil resources economy. The UAE has invested huge amount of money in companies like Microsoft, Nvidia, the semiconductors, etc., artificial intelligence. And these are the most exposed, really. And so all this interconnectivity hub is the main target. So this is really deeply impacted. And that impact, of course, directly UAE economy, but also all the regional economy landscape and the world economy. So perhaps I am a little bit pushy in saying that we will not recover the UAE model as we knew it. For me, it's a heavy trend. But of course, UAE has a huge amount of liquidity, and they have some, returns. But the problem is they are very isolated politically. Of course, they made a lot of, they strengthened their partnership with India. But even India, with Modi choices to break through with the neutral traditional foreign policy of India is at risk. So that's why I'm very skeptical about the ability of the UAE to pursue this aggressive agenda of mixed economic policy and also their militarized foreign policy. So this is one of the main points I wanted to highlight, and perhaps we will go further for the question you raised about the architecture of the security.
We can talk about it later in further.
Yes.
First saw the influence in Yemen. I think one of the crucial, interestingly enough, one of the crucial reasons for the peace agreement that was struck in Yemen not being extended, although practically it's often extended, was that everybody wanted to have Saudi Arabia paying the wages of the civil service. Mm-hmm. So the wages of the civil service of the Houthis is not paid, and they have asked for that money for quite a while. So I think that's probably one of the major attractions, that you can come in and provide some money here. So that's probably important. And it's, I think the Ethiopian question is very timely and very important, because we're talking about these cleavages. And, you know, for UAE, I agree with you that flows are very important, but for sure it's not in all of the other countries. Mm-hmm. The Emirates' role in Somalia, and I would say Yemen, has also something to do with federalization. Yes. Very strong federalization agenda, and also inside Somalia and other places, anti-Muslim Brotherhood. Suspect that in Libya as well. My point here is basically being that you see the cleavages very clearly in Ethiopia, because Ethiopia now is a torn country. The Ethiopian experts, Norwegian Ethiopian experts that I hold in high regards, like Kjetil Tronvoll, he says that there's going to be war tomorrow. The only problem is saying it once a week, and it's not the war, but if you see the shuttle diplomacy, what you have there is a clear, amongst the experts, we perceive that it's a kind of clear alliance where you have Turkey and Somalia maybe lurking together with Eritrea, Tigray, and also maybe the Burhan forces, and on the other side you have the UAE, you have Israel, and you have Ethiopia also in Sudan. But it's a little bit less clear. You have Turkey going in and putting heavy pressure on Ethiopia to not recognize Somaliland, and it probably worked. You have Turkish pressure with regards to Tigray, where Turkey flies to Addis, and the Israelis fly to Tigray. So the Israeli embassy has been very active as of late, and there's also limitations to Turkish and also Israeli support. So there is a general interest, okay, we have allies, but we want to keep some kind of stability at the local level, and it's very important to take into consideration Ethiopia is a great power. Emirati played a large role in winning the last round of civil war in Ethiopia and will probably play a role in the future, although the Ethiopian army is getting back. But you can also see external interventions here actually seemingly for peace, with a clear mind on national interest. So both of them can play to a certain extent together, but Ethiopia will be a player. And you know what's important here is also a part of the old great game in the Horn of Africa, the control over the Nile, where you actually had the pattern after Israeli independence that they were always together with Ethiopia. If Ethiopia was allied with the Soviet Union, Israel was together with Ethiopia anyway. And what you see now is maybe a reconfiguration of that old pattern, but also an interest of some of the big actors of creating some kind of stability to avoid at least the Ethiopian war as of late. 2 last months, that's how I interpreted that traffic, you know. Israel going to Mecca, something new. You know, the Turkish interest for Ethiopia as supposed enemy, but maybe it's not as clear as enemy as we believe it to be. I also wanted to highlight another thing, and that is the extent. I don't think it can be underestimated, the extent of economic integration in the Horn of Africa with the Emirates. That's where you come to your flows again. I would say that for the last 16 years, the economic capital of Somalia has been Abu Dhabi, and you can see that in contracts in Somalia. Very often they have tangible notice at the end. This contract on conflict will be settled according to Emirati law. That's basically what it says, because the court system was so useless, basically. So I think those financial flows is very important, and if the Emiratis decline, then it will have real impact on Somali economy. It will probably have impact on Eritrean economy, and it will probably have impact on Kenyan economy as well.
Thank you so much.
I am tempted to go the opposite direction. I think the war can be a great moment of truth. It underscores inherent contradictions in the geoeconomic dimension of the policies that have been carried out, but both within the Gulf region and across the Red Sea by these countries, and these geopolitical games that have they've gone towards zero-sum approaches. It is obvious that after the war, these countries will be forced, the Gulf countries in particular, will be forced to review their policy stance, both in terms of affordability, I mean, has been mentioned, reconstruction will take a toll, but also in terms of rationale. For instance, I'm of the opinion that Emirates in the last few years has lived through a psychotic dimension. I mean, the Emirati policy is basically peaceful trading position, and that and is in contradiction what MBZ has been trying to pursue. Building, increasing the integration in economic terms with the Horn of Africa, building long-term infrastructure, ports. This needs a peaceful environment. It doesn't benefit from tensions. If you build a port, you have an horizon of 30, 40 years. You don't want to see this disrupted the way we are seeing it today. So I think this contradiction will come to a fore. They will need to push the countries towards the reconsideration of what they've been trying to do. It's not the only way, because also take into account that we already witnessed a timid detente since 2019 inside the Middle East, with the rapprochement between Emirates and Iran, Saudi and Iran, Turkey and Egypt, Turkey and Gulf countries. All that was a process that was ongoing before the Gaza war started and has been disrupted over the past 2 years. Emirates came out with a zero problem policy with neighbors. That was clearly in contradiction with what they were doing in East Africa, because they had a lot of problems with neighbors, with the Saudis, with the Qataris, with Turkey, etc., etc. All that can, all it needs is a change of course. You basically, it needs a policy decision from the leadership in the face of the costs and the failures, even in terms of security, that have been shown and underscored by the current war with Iran. These countries in the Gulf has been basing the growth model on stability and on the fact that they were an island of stability inside of a region, the total instability. That was clearly, it's a project that it's very short-sighted. You cannot live in an island of stability if your neighborhood is on fire. That is, it needs a different approach, and that's why we go into this. Reconsideration of the overall security architecture of the region, which has always been a missing element. It goes together with the very poor economic integration that has been one of the also missing elements within the Middle East and with the broader region we mentioned. All those elements can be reset. There will be, it's not going to be an easy process. It needs trust building, it needs confidence building, but history has a lot of experiences. I mean, in Europe, we have the OSCE model in the middle of the Cold War that allowed confidence building across the big divide of the two camps. These countries can follow similar model. I think a gradual approach, building on shared vulnerability and shared interests, from climate change and water scarcity to issues of security, maritime security, etc. There are low-hanging fruits that a cooperative approach can produce. That all it takes is a change of course in policy. And I think the failures of the past 3 years will push that. I'm convinced of that, but we will see what happens.
If UAE accept to follow this agenda.
But UAE is basically Abu Dhabi, because Dubai, I'm 100% sure that they are not on the same.
That's why I think MBZ perhaps lives his last days.
Be diplomatic.
I'm not diplomat, I assume.
Please join me to give all the 4 excellent panelists a hand, and thank you again so much. And thank you everyone for coming. I forgot to say that this seminar is organized by the Rusmena Project, led by Jakub Lutsimirski, a research professor here who couldn't be here unfortunately, but also organized by the Norwegian Center for Geopolitics. So thank you so much all for coming, and see you in the next time.